doing a great job pulling together a great team. They were going out and doing installs and this and that. And I thought that it would be a good idea to, like, you know, for some of the NYC mesh people to see, know what happened before them, and going back, you know, to before FiOS and even earlier. And so I've been invited on these esteemed gentlemen along to sort of talk about their experiences wiring. And I did around, as I say, 17 years ago, Internet Society of New York, we organised a thing of community, and Bruce was here representing Heaven, as I recall, at the time, and we had people from Mouth, which was organised by Andrew Brachet, who was looking at schools. And but the people that were really doing the work, I would say, right now, was Dorsai, who had been hammering through Rawls and doing the most basics of things. And the original, probably can tell us about the original ISPs in New York, which was Planix, was going to be before Planix.
And so Ninebugs and Dorsai.
And so the mic is here, the camera is over there, so I'd like to first introduce Charles Rawls to talk about stand or you can sit.
Well, first of all, I was always told you stand up to be seen, speak up to be heard, and shut up to be appreciated. All right. Since I see we do not have, well, we have a couple of ladies in the room. We've got at least one old guy with a heart condition, so I'm going to have to moderate my usual phrases of speech. So, let me take you down a trip down memory lane. We'll stop off at a couple of cul-de-sacs, wander in a couple of dark alleys, hopefully we won't get mugged. 30 years ago, this year's a kind of interesting year. 30 years ago, the Dorsai NYC was established. 20 years ago, an organization called ACOR was established. 10 years ago, an organization called Bad Wolf was established. 30 years ago, I was working for a company called EDS, and my manager in Dallas sold a Macintosh computer to a guy in New York. And they decided my office was a good place to make the swap. He shipped the computer to me, the guy comes in, hands me certified checks for X dollars, checks the computer, takes it. Well, of course, the UPS guy was late. And we started talking about the state of the computer community in New York City. Now there was the PC community. And if you had an Apple, yeah. There was the Apple community, if you had a Mac, yeah. If you had a Mac, and there was a Mac community, if you had a Commodore, yeah. Right? There needed to be a place where everyone would feel welcome and intimacy. It's New York, we got the UN. Hey, why not? Let's add another embassy in here. Great conversation, guys. Get the computer delivered. He goes off, shows up at my office 2 weeks later. He goes, yeah, we're talking. Yeah. He goes, you said you needed this, you needed that, you needed this, you needed that. I'm like, yeah, come on, let's take a ride. Hop in a cab, we go up. And there is an HP 3000 Series 3 Mini with, now we're talking a full rack, with a whopping one processor running at 75 megahertz, a whopping 256K of RAM, yeah. A hard drive. You've seen dishwashers, you've seen clothes washers, hard drive. Yeah, that was a whopping 80 megs. Now, it's ours. He's bought it. He's got a perfect place for it. Got power, it's got an air conditioner. Hey, we can just do this. No problem is that's on a 5th floor walk-up. Yeah. We got it upstairs. We got it assembled. We brought it up. And Theo, the Embassy Online, was born. And there are people who still as a joke one year, a couple of boys decided to log in on the current Dorsai server would become hello-dorsai.embassy. Because that was the login that you used, was hello Dorsai Embassy, and would drop you into the menu BBS system. And we had, stuff for just about everything out there. Had one of the first chat systems. Most interesting was one of the first BBSs around with 8 phone lines. Yeah, big stuff there. We decided, really, what do we want to do with this? Because here is an interesting technology for communication. This is a technology for empowering people. This is a technology for teaching. Along about that time, I think my wife was about ready to divorce me, because I started not going home and I started staying and working on this computer, and working on the system, and interacting online. We had the loft, we had a nice place. And Bruce said he's got some interest in mistakes. Yes, my first mistake would have been, take your funky computer and go away. 30 years. And 30 years has been the same pattern. I get home on a weekend. I'm in the city Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday comes around, and there's either some issue going on that we have to work with, an install we have to do, school has to be wired on Saturday. So I don't go home. I just, 2 weeks at a crack. Finally, I had enough of the city, get upstate. Dorsai ran like that for a number of years. And there was a fire and a flood. And we moved. We went offline for about a year. We put together, started getting involved with Novell networks, Cubics cards, and running multiple, taking us through that entire cabinet of stuff, putting it into a single PC sitting on the desk. And it's pretty massive tower. Yeah, I think we had like 800 megahertz processor, maybe 2 megs of RAM, 4 megs of RAM. And it happened. Spent a bunch of money. We spent a bunch of money to put together a project. And whoops, it didn't work. It didn't work. Put in one of these PC cards in the server. Hey, we're fine, we're good, we're golden. Put in 2. Hey, we're fine, we're good, we're golden. Put in 3. Nope, not happening. Swap cards around. And you spend a week playing that game of swapping hardware and trying to do debugging. Turns out that NetWare 215 had a problem. Yeah. Am I dating myself?
No, I have number 212, so.
Yeah. NetWare 215 had a problem with reserved RAM. He would not, because every network interface in each one of these cards was 2 network interfaces you would insert. It would consume an amount of memory. When you're out of memory, out of this working buffer, not gonna run. Actually, then 215 Charlie came out, because I got a little bit crazy one night with a debugger. And next thing you know, some guys over at Novell got basically a mail with a floppy disk. Said, by the way, I recommend that. And it expanded, it made it free floating, so you could have virtually unlimited interface. Well, unlimited right up to the limit of it. Great stuff. And then Somebody just started talking to me about FidoNet. Anybody remember FidoNet? Well, FidoNet, you know, Dorsai being Dorsai, right? If everybody else in the room is dressed down, the Dorsai are going to show up in a suit and tie. Oh, gee. You know, it's just contrarian that way. So we looked at a product called RhymeNet. And RhymeNet had this UUCP to RhymeNet gateway. UUCP. UUCP. Sounds really cool stuff. Well, Bank Columbia, Bank Umbre, Bank Beck, Bank Dorsai, Bank Rawls. That was one of the primary. Am I talking too much? Or is that
No, it's fine.
Is that the taser to tell me my time be up?
No, that's fine, I'm just.
So we started working with UCP, and this was 88, 87, 88, back in the dark days. Finally got to the point that it was simpler. Instead of trying to use the RhymeNet to UUCP gateway, it was simpler to take the tape drive from the previous system, get an adapter card for the PC, basically spool all this out to tape, send the tapes up to Columbia every night, where they would dump them onto the net, extract our mail, dump it back onto a tape. Jack would do this at night. I'd get up in the morning, slap the tapes on the drive, start our import process, and go to work. Come in late that night, do our export, dump it to tape, hand Jack the tapes, and away they go. Yeah. The original internet free access point in the city was SneakerNet. Moved again and wound up in the combat zone of Long Island City. If anybody knows where 11th Street is, you know, about half a block from the...
So we're off 38th Avenue and 13th Street.
Yeah, just about half a block from the housing projects there. It's funny, one of the few white guys can walk through that housing project in a suit and not get mowed. And somebody somewhere got us involved with this little package called Sunsoft, which later became Solaris. And PC running this Unix. I remember that. Something like 20-something floppies to build a kernel, to actually boot the kernel, to actually read into device drivers, to actually load the rest of the operating system from the 150 meg tape. Yeah, back in the bad old days. About this time, we'd gone from 8, 10 people, 15 people. Yeah, and some of those kids, you know, kid showed up on the doorstep at the ripe age of 16, plunks himself down in front of a Commodore Amiga and proceeds to basically move in. Like, okay, kid, whatever. See some young people here. See a lot of old geezers too. But I see some young people. And this is what really, really energized Dorsai for many, many years. Is the young blood, the young kids. Yeah, that young kid who showed up at 16, he's now the chief technology officer and chief science officer for a company that's hands-on working with it. This is what I feel Dorsai brought to the community. You know, you don't have to walk in knowing everything. In fact, I prefer you not walk in knowing everything, because there's only one person to know everything. Me. Which brings us to, some people said, what are your regrets? What are some of your mistakes? Mistake one, don't let an arrogant, bigoted, know-it-all, ill-tempered so-and-so be your lead man. Don't let that be the face of your organization. Now, the good thing about it is, I don't use spray tan, and I don't have a wig. Ooh, tough crowd. Tough crowd. Where was I? Yes, arrogant leaders. Along about that time, a company called Performance Systems International. Anybody remember PSINet?
Sure.
Yep. They started offering dial-up PPP. But it was like, what, $600 a month for a 9600 baud PPP dial-up? Now, of course, we had to get involved with that. And then Sprint was coming around offering T1s for $3,000 a month, plus the $7,000 router. All right, well, we had to get that. Lord knows we had to have that. And then one of our buddies said, hey, you know what? You need a news server, you need a mail server, you need a this server, you need a that server, you need a Gopher server, you need an Archie server, you need a boom, boom, boom. So all of a sudden, that PC that was sitting on that desk became 4 racks of sun gear. Some of it, yeah, big stuff. That's about a time of 10 years. And about that time, a little French man shows up. I think you've met, yes. He goes, you have the internet? Yes. I need a computer. Okay. Why? I need to look some stuff up. Okay. Here, sit down. By the way, who are you? Turns out he was doing research because his wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Out of that relationship came a thing called the Association of Cancer Online Resources, acor.org. And for 20 years, I've had the pleasure of being this chief technology officer, CIO, CTO, and chief gopher, and the guy who everybody calls when it breaks. On a bad day, good day, we would process over 1 million pieces of mail daily. Good day for mail, bad day for the fact that there's 1 million pieces of mail from cancer patients, caregivers, supporters, doctors going. The old story about nobody ever came to ACOR because they were in good health. Many years working with that. Some very, very interesting concepts came out of that organization. And by the way, in the background, Dorsai is still running. We're still teaching classes. And a little story, if someone goes to badwolfbarandgrill.com, or if someone goes to roguechef.com, you'll see the outgrowth of one of these. Because we'd have disadvantaged kids come to learn about computers. We work with them, and I work for a living. Dorsai, ACOR is my 5 to 9. You got to get up and do the 9 to 5 too. Wives, get upset when paychecks don't come in. They just get cranky.
Speaking of 5, I'm going to say 5 minutes.
I got 5 minutes. Okay, so out of this, along around 8 o'clock, all these young kids I'm working with, 7:30, 8 o'clock, would file out. Like, what the hell's going on? And it got explained to me that, yeah, if they didn't get home, they didn't eat that night. So, yeah, to hell with that, I learned to cook. I learned to cook in large quantities. I still cook in large quantities. Dorsai, Acor. Another lesson learned from this, make sure of your succession. Make sure that your leadership, your technologists, and your field people have a succession. September the 11th, 2001, 5 of Dorsai's best were working for Marsh McLennan in the South Tower. Not a one of them got out. Yeah, rather painful for an organization, rather painful for operations, and then you take the purely human factor of like, okay, those 5 kids, I've known them since they were 16, 17, 18, 19, right? I watched them take their first drink. I watched them take their first legal drink. You know, I've worked with them for years. I eat with them, work with them, and they're gone. It will take the heart out of an organization. So, making it very fast, speeding it up by about another 5 years. Dorsai in and of itself still exists. We don't do a lot, mainly because we were founded as a nonprofit organization. And lesson learned number 3, or 4, or 5. Yeah, I think this counts for about 5 lessons. Never, ever advertise yourself as a nonprofit. For the simple reason that, oh, it's nonprofit. A, I don't understand. Obviously, you're putting money in your pocket from this somehow. Or B, oh, you're a community service group. You're a nonprofit group. Hey, can you host my website? Sure. Which becomes, well, you have to write my website. Which becomes, you have to update my website. Which becomes, my email. Which becomes, why isn't my email working? Which becomes being called at 3 o'clock in the morning by some director of some organization screaming at the top of their lungs because they have not cleared their mailbox. They have hit their storage limit on mail. Their mail isn't working, and it's obviously your fault. Oh, and by the way, what do you get paid for this? Because it's community service. It's a non-for-profit. Your time is worth exactly what you charge for it. So the Dorsai Embassy became an organization called Bad Wolf. All right? We are an LLC. Now, the fact that we're an LLC does not mean I have to make a profit. In fact, no, I want to break even. If I break even, I pay no taxes and I don't have to keep pulling money out of my pocket like I'm doing with a .org. Trying to tell me my time is up.
Just, take it easy. Finish what you're saying.
All right. But that doesn't mean we don't do interesting things. It does not mean we don't get involved with human rights campaigns. It does not mean we do not get involved with human trafficking. How do I say? Investigating and abating human trafficking via the net. It does not mean that we do not do good things. It just means that I have the capability to sit there and go, gee, I'd love to help you, but our rate card is there. Service, $100 an hour. If you want to watch, $200 an hour. If you want to help, $300 an hour. If you want to argue with me, $5 million an hour. All right, any questions?
I think what we might do is leave questions to the end, let everybody go. But I will say that it's evident that you grew a hard nose through this through this business. Thank you, Charles. So I guess next we'll do Bruce, because I think he's the next most senior in terms of his activity and you know, I don't really count Bruce because Kushnick, because he's like a telco guy rather than he's in a different field. But so Bruce, your business was right. You know, well, you had, when I first met you, you had virtual Harlem, right?
Yeah, we developed the
and I remember that you stood up at the New York Broadband Advisory Council and did this long rap about the Deep South.
Digital Mississippi.
Mississippi, but you were basically were a pioneer in wireless in terms of sticking antennas on top of buildings uptown, right? Isn't that true? Or am I getting the wrong end of the stick there?
No. We did a lot with wireless. We did that tied into what we were doing with community technology centers when I had 134 of them back in.
And your accent was on city planning, I remember, you know, the
smart and green buildings.
Yeah. So anyway,
I'll run through it and I'll be chronological. And then maybe what this can do is sort of create a tie, because I work with Dana and Tony. But the first, well, if we take it all the way back to, and if the idea is it's community networking, but we can talk about community technology, we can talk about Playing to Win. And Playing to Win was the first community technology center in the United States. It was in East Harlem. It actually began in Union Settlement. It was founded by a woman by the name of Tony Stone. And then I joined that organization in 1992. At the time, they had moved to a building that was owned by Dave Hodson of General Atlantic Partners. And the idea was to really try to make sure that everyone had access to computers. So that was 1992. It was located 111th Street and 5th Avenue. I had been doing a lot of stuff at the time with Apple computers. I was back and forth between Harlem and Silicon Valley, doing a lot of work around multimedia computing. I'd done stuff with Apple. Actually, the first technology application I developed was called the Black Inventors Continuum. This was in the late 80s, and it was a CD-ROM for the Macintosh computer. And I worked at what was called the Center for Children and Technology. So it was a whole focus on educational technology, and I was really focused on how do you make sure that you find ways that inner city students would get involved with STEM learning, science, math. And so my thing was, well, if we can use a CD-ROM and maybe make it like a video game with music and those kinds of things, you know, I think that would make some sense. So I had developed this prototype. It was a series of HyperCard stacks, which we then turned into a CD-ROM and bundled it with the early Macintosh computers that were disseminated in schools all over the country. After doing that, I was doing a lot of stuff out in Silicon Valley, but I was always focused on this idea of, I think this can really change things as far as inequalities in education in specifically Harlem, but of course that's any urban market. I started working with the folks at Playing to Win from 92, stayed there till like 94, raised a lot of money, brought in a lot of multimedia technologies, and even brought in the first new media center. That was coming out of what was this sort of offshoot of Apple and the Apple Foundation. It was a new media center. I raised the money to bring that to Playing to Win, but I had an opportunity to actually work on the first website that the America's Cup developed. So this is now 1994, and I developed the America's Cup website, and at the same time I was starting to work closely with this organization called the Institute for Learning Technology, which was at Columbia University. That's where I ended up spending 10 years. And so after I did this website with the America's Cup, and we actually did the development out of Harvard, spent a lot of time actually in La Jolla with the sailors, used a software program developed by my friend Bob Matsuoka, who I think, he's at City Maps. It was called Bob's HTMLer, and so we could actually write HTML. And developed this website. Our host was Delphi Internet Company. It predated Netscape, so the browser was Mozilla. And after we built it, they didn't know what to do with it and ended up selling it to Scott Forsman as a classroom CD-ROM. So I then joined Robbie McClintock and a bunch of folks at the Institute for Learning Technologies. There I was the senior educational technologist, and we had raised the initial monies from the Department of Commerce back when the TOP program, which then became the BTOP program, had its original name, which was the TIIAP program, which is some crazy acronym. But we had raised about 1.5, maybe $2 million, and our job was to deploy the internet into the first 6 schools in the city of New York. This is 1995 to 1996. So that's where I sort of learned how to develop websites. Our sort of website development side of it was a shop that we helped develop at the Environmental Defense Fund. So the project was called HEAP, which stood for the Harlem Environmental Access Project. So when Robbie McClintock called me and told me what it was, I'm like, HEAP, what are you talking about? What does this mean? He goes, no, it's an acronym, but we're going to put the internet into the first 6 schools in the city of New York. So we wired 6 schools basically in Harlem, and we began that work using Columbia because of our electrical engineering department, our computer science departments, we actually could develop a lot of the technologies as well as support the development of the schools. We collaborated for a number of years, and after that initial raise of I think about 1.5 to 2.5, we then raised about 7.5 to $11 million. This was all through the federal government because they had these different groups that were focusing on addressing this issue of what they called the information superhighway and how you would address the digital divide. At about the 1998 point, Andrew Roget founded Mouse with Sarah Holloway, and what we were basically doing at that time was supporting .org. So we supported Mouse, we supported Heaven, which is how I met Jolie. We also supported Computers for Youth. At some point, we were working with NYCwireless. And so from 1994 to 2004, I had this sort of 10-year run managing these different projects at Columbia that all had a community focus. And it was always focused on this idea of equity, whether it was in schools. About 2001, 2002, we began to focus on communities inside of community technology and actually reopened Playing to Win and supported 134 community technology centers. And we were trying to focus on and talk about this idea of social venture philanthropy because of some of the things that were happening. And the bottom fell out of the .com market, right? The bubble burst. So those were the matching funds that had supported a lot of our projects at the university. And then George Bush got into office and defunded all those programs. So then what I began to work on at that point was I went down south to Mississippi and began to focus, working with a partner of mine, Carlton Brown, on how can we bring broadband to the Mississippi Delta. And I actually worked from 2004 to 2008 in the Mississippi Delta and in Jackson, Mississippi, trying to figure out how to address this issue of broadband in the Delta. We worked with this college called Mississippi Valley State University. It's actually where Jerry Rice went to school and played football. That's their claim to fame. Otherwise, they're in the Delta, right? And we built some community technology centers. Actually, one was in the town, and I can't think of the name, but it's where Emmett Till got murdered. So we did some of that, sort of 2004, 2007. And then Obama got into office, and there was an interest in broadband, and so came back here and started working once again, like I said, with Carlton Brown, with Clayton Banks, and we built smart and green buildings in Harlem, which helped transform 116th Street. And part of what we were able to do was get through Verizon the first Fios drop. The first commercial Fios drop in Harlem was on 116th Street at this building called the Kalahari. and working with some of my other colleagues, Mark Josephson and Doug McGowan, what we do is we built buildings that had fiber optic infrastructure. And the idea was buildings would function as mesh network antennae and help us think about how we can platform the community at a point when ultimately we could potentially build these larger networks. So this has taken us up to about 2008, 2009, at which time I was at Columbia University. Back at Columbia University, I've got this weird thing where I kind of met Columbia, then I leave, I come back doing something else. And now the focus was at the School of Engineering. And there I was, the first entrepreneur in residence focusing on spinning companies out into this burgeoning tech sector. And it wasn't simply Silicon Alley. We also looked at trying to spin companies out into Brooklyn before the Navy Yard got organized. But what we were looking at was like, man, we're spinning these companies in essence out of Harlem. Why aren't we doing this in Harlem? And so it sort of brought a number of things together, and there was this opportunity to go after BTOP funding, so we wrote the proposal out of the School of Engineering with this organization called the Center for Technology Innovation Community Engagement that you were looking into, Tony, which unfortunately doesn't exist. That's sort of the drag with these soft money ephemeral institutions, right? And, you know, when you have some monies, you can actually focus them on these type of, you know, socially and purpose-driven missions, but then ultimately politics get in the way, or you may be in advance of what you're trying to do. But we did put together a $20 million proposal and submitted it called Silicon Harlem. The idea was to draw on what we built in Harlem up to that point using some of the smart and green buildings, and think about how to build a wireless network that would go from 116th to the State Office Building on 125th Street, all the way up to the Armory on 168th Street, all the way up to, you may remember some of this stuff, Bruce, all the way up to the water tower in the 170s, and figure out how to build this advanced wireless network, which then underneath, you'd connect nonprofit organizations as a way to ultimately get the businesses. Sort of this has all kind of come full circle, spun Silicon Harlem out of Columbia in 2011, and now with Clayton Banks, we're now pursuing that as a for-profit LLC. We're not a nonprofit, we're a for-profit LLC. And we predominantly focus on broadband deployment and STEM learning, and looking a lot into the role that digital literacy plays. We make our money through our consulting. We have a very successful for-profit conference. It's the only major conference in Harlem. Excuse me if I get some water. Michael comes on a regular basis. And then sort of how we started Silicon Harlem, we modeled it after Digital Dumbo. We started as a meetup. We were able to do it on the ground floor of the building I was telling you about, the Kalahari, where ultimately, you know, we built the for-profit condominium structure first and kept ownership of the ground floor space. Folks want us to put like a CVS or a big box store. We refused to do it. We actually built a for-profit community center with 3 state-of-the-art theaters and with the fastest fiber and Wi-Fi.
Who's been there? You all have to go. It's the most incredible place.
And so that's how we sort of found out that there was a whole bunch of nerds and geeks in Harlem, right? And we had our first meetup February 26th of 2013. 500 people showed up. Then a month later, we had our second meetup. Another 500 people showed up. And then all of a sudden, this thing started catching on in terms of this idea of community-based meetups. We started to see the growth of co-working spaces. And then now, sort of to jump to where we are today, you know, we're working close with WeWork. We're in the 125th Street co-working space. And then now what we're starting to focus on again is sort of community-based broadband, as well as this idea of STEM learning for students. So it kind of has come full circle. So maybe there is something to this idea of an idea whose time has come.
Great stuff. I'm saving you to last, Tony. And so now I'd like to bring up Dana, who has been the lead, I think, for the whole time on NYCwireless.
Almost all the time.
Whole time.
Almost.
And I might go out and get some more water once Dana's going, so we haven't died. And you know, I'm interested to know how it all got started.
Yeah. So am I. I'll stand on the side so you guys can see my words and pictures. So, who here has used Wi-Fi in a park? Public park in New York City? All right. So, unfortunately, only a few of you, but who knows when the first Wi-Fi access point was installed in New York City's, in a public space in New York City?
Was that Marshall? What was that before that?
It was way before that. Who knows when it was first installed in the world? No?
Well, it must have been 99.
So,
99?
no, it's a little after that. So, it's arguable whether it was New York City or Boston, or some may argue in Seattle. But as is the case, I think, for both of you, you know, though the Silicon Valley is seen as like the genesis of technology, of modern technology, the truth of the matter is that New York City actually very quietly experiences many of these firsts before Silicon Valley. So NYCwireless started as most of these things do, a crazy group of young geeks sitting together on a couch, talking to each other, saying, "Wouldn't it be cool if?" And in this case, it was, "Wouldn't it be cool if we could take this?" At the time, wasn't so crappy, but still kind of crappy, dial-up and DSL internet, and share it with our neighbors. So actually, NYCwireless was started by Anthony Townsend, who some of you may know, Terry Schmidt, who's actually moved west, and I was actually still in school, in grad school at the time, and I was doing something, the same thing, sitting around at the Media Lab, wondering wouldn't it be cool if, and then we actually built in parallel the stuff that NYCwireless was doing in Boston, at least in my last year there. I came down in 2001, just before September 11th, which was a wonderful time to be in New York, and found these guys at a local nonprofit space in I guess it was like in the 20s on the east side, and we actually got started and started building stuff. And the whole idea for them was to actually build and literally hang an access point out their window, 802.11b, hanging out their window on Cornelia Street, which is where a couple of them lived, and actually be able to sit on their stoop and use what at the time was pretty modern technology in the form of a 486 laptop with a little Orinoco wireless card hanging out the side, and talk to their neighbors, which is of course the thing that New York City is famous for, or used to be. So shortly thereafter, they word got around a little bit, and New York City became home to the first public space Wi-Fi in Tompkins Square Park. It's actually the first public space Wi-Fi, like official public space Wi-Fi in the world. In Tompkins Square Park, with a little antenna in the awning of a secondhand record store on Avenue B, or no, maybe it was Avenue A. And we built, I actually wasn't part of that project, but part of the subsequent ones, and we built free Wi-Fi in public spaces, the gathering spaces of New York City. And we created this organization, NYCwireless, to really, we decided to do 4 big things. Promote open wireless hotspots, which I think we actually succeeded in doing pretty well. Provide a forum for wireless networking, which we did for a while. Our meetup groups were perhaps not as popular as the ones you've had in the last few years with Wireless Harlem, but we still drew a bunch of geeks out on a regular basis. advocate community wireless community networking, which we sort of wrote, in some respect, wrote the book on, and promote public spectrum, which we did very painfully at the FCC and in DC, and especially in New York City Council. So that's the genesis story. We built a lot of the public Wi-Fi throughout, from 2001 through, I would say, at least 2011, 2012. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's the big ones. We started at Tompkins Square Park. For those of you that were in New York City at the time, we built Bryant Park, which is still probably the most popular public space Wi-Fi in New York City, singular space in New York City. Bowling Green Park, Rector Street with the Downtown Alliance. They're also still going strong. They have 8. Well, they had it in 2003. They expanded to 8, but now they've got a whole zone if you go to their website. And we actually, in Madison Square Park, we actually have some photos of that, which is pretty cool. And we started doing the thing that actually we discovered was going to be the best way to move this effort forward as a nonprofit, which is we started working with bids, which, as it turns out, is a great thing to do in New York, in Manhattan. Not so wonderful in outer boroughs, but still. So we expanded the Downtown Alliance ones, and then we started also partnering in 2003 with Dunn Development and Community Access. Community Access runs low-income housing developments in New York City. Dunn Development Corp actually builds it. In fact, we still consult with them on occasion. So we built, with them, we lit up about a dozen low-income housing residents. And to this day, I still get occasional emails from folks, asking about why their Wi-Fi isn't working, even though we haven't actually been responsible for that because they brought on their own network team. But starting in 2003, there were, of all the, if you can remember what the internet was like in 2003 in New York City, it was, there was no FiOS, there was barely DSL, there was, 5 meg cable modem service, maybe if you were lucky. But if you happen to live in the handful of low-income housing buildings, you could actually get free Wi-Fi, which was amazing. We worked with the Brooklyn Museum and set up the first public Wi-Fi in a museum. I believe that's the first public Wi-Fi in a museum. They were really innovative at the time. They still are, but that was, they had a woman who was responsible for their network infrastructure, which was, she was really, really pretty amazing at what she did there. And in 2006, we opened up the first park in Brooklyn with Brooklyn Bridge Park. As is oftentimes the case, it started in an art space there and lived there for a while until 2011 when the Dumbo bid got involved and we actually built the Dumbo Hot Zone, which I believe was the first hot zone outside of Manhattan. And we lit up all of Dumbo with free Wi-Fi. I don't know where the pictures for that are. It's somewhere on another hard drive somewhere. We also lit up Jackson Square Park, which was in West Village, and Wagner Park, which was in south of Battery Park City, which I think, though Bryant Park is the most popular, Wagner Park is by far the most beautiful Wi-Fi hotspot to sit at and use the internet. This is what Wi-Fi, public access Wi-Fi looked like in New York City in circa 2002. This was our hotspot map. The software was actually a piece of software called Wireless Network Database, if you can read that, and was built by some folks out in Northern California. We had since upgraded, and this is what it looked like in 2006. And you can see there's a bunch more Wi-Fi, but most importantly, all of these bigger bubbles were actually the next generation software that actually actively managed all of the hotspots. So nowadays, you can go to a company like Ubiquiti and get cloud-based software, manage all your access points and all this other stuff very easy. A few years before that, there was, what was the name of the wireless group that grew out of MIT and was sold recently?
Ruckus?
Yeah, Meraki, yeah. Meraki, they did the same thing for very expensively. Now you can do it very cheaply. But back in 2006, we actually, with some folks up in Montreal, built some software that did this for free. This is what the captive portal looked like. In fact, we were NYCwireless, along with a group called NoCat, which was based out of Northern California, built both the first hotspot operating system and the first captive portal system. And this is what it looked like in 2002, running at, this is the Bryant Park one, sponsored by Intel, of all things. They are, I believe, Bryant Park is, I believe, the only hotspot in New York City that has ever been able to solicit commercial support from large companies. And only because they are by far the most trafficked space in the city in terms of singular hotspots, which was part of a lot of the stuff that we talked with the city council about. We'll get to that in a minute. This is what it evolved into in 2006. I love looking at these old pictures and screenshots because it sort of shows you where we came from. This mind you is 12 years ago, or almost 12 years ago, which is kind of neat. Madison Square Park, the Dumbo Bid Wi-Fi. We also one of the other firsts that we did was we developed and open sourced the first acceptable usage policy for public space Wi-Fi. And to this day, this is the one that most networks, certainly the community networks, but most other commercial networks have cribbed off of this. So we're a bunch of hackers, mostly hackers here, I assume, or hardware, software. This is what the hardware actually looked like back in the day. These are things called Sopris boards, embedded 486s. They started becoming available from a company in Northern California in around 2004, I think, 2005. You can see an Atheros Wi-Fi card there with pigtail antenna connection. These were our lifeblood, and they actually, running at 400 milliwatt, they actually were about 10 times more powerful than the stuff that you get in laptops even today, although far less sensitive because the technology has evolved. Sector antennas, omnidirectional antennas. One of the big learnings that we had was that these guys here were kind of okay. These guys here were magical because they were sector antennas with circular polarity. And if that means nothing to you, you could basically think of, trying to beam 802.11 B or G Wi-Fi signaling into a park. Presents you with two enormous challenges. One, both of them built around water. So, who has a microwave? Does anyone know why microwaves work?
What are we saying, 2.4?
Yeah. So microwaves work on the concept that approximately at 2.4 gigahertz is the resonance frequency of water, and microwaves work by operating in the junk band of the Wi-Fi, the junk band of the spectrum, 2.4 gigahertz, which is incidentally why when you turn on your microwave and you have an old network, it used to cut out. But the reason why microwaves work is the same reason why public space Wi-Fi is challenging, which is that water blocks it. And of course, the two biggest inhabitants of city parks are two different types are water structures and water bags, namely trees and people. And of course, if you are trying to, they sort of take up a continuous amount of space where the people end height-wise, the leaves and foliage begin. And of course, you want to use your Wi-Fi in the middle of the summer when the trees are fully in bloom. So of course, it's challenging to get the 2.4 gigahertz into the park from one of the corners. So the circularly polarized antennas, instead of either trying to work their way through either horizontally or vertically, actually rotate around and essentially drill right through the tree canopy to let you actually receive Wi-Fi signal on your devices, even though the access points are above or around the first or 1.5 floors high. Waterproof Ethernet cables, I know probably a lot more about that than most people in this room. And hedge trimmers, because of course you have to clear out some leaves here and there. And then software-wise, we built Pebble Linux. In fact, Terry Schmidt, one of the guys that started NYCwireless, assembled the first Linux distribution, the first operating system that was optimized for running Wi-Fi hotspots, and we run on this 486. And it ran the NoCat software that you saw. And then subsequent to that, someone picked that up and developed it further into approximately 2005. As I mentioned earlier, it's been a while since I've given one of these presentations, so the dates are marginally fuzzy for me. Pyramid Linux, which was like the next generation in 2005, and Wi-Fi Dog, which was this technology that was initially pioneered by a group out of Montreal called Île Sans Fil, or Island Without Wires. And so this is actually the hotspot on the top of in Wagner Square Park in Battery Park City. So over the years, there have been a whole bunch of other groups. As I mentioned, this stuff really got started in 2001. Baywug, Seattle Wireless was a huge group out in Seattle, obviously. I still talk to some of those guys. NoCat was based out of Sonoma. NoCat and NYCwireless were really some of the first public space Wi-Fi in the country. Boston in 2002, they actually had a wireless corridor in Boston of all places, right down, is it Beacon Street, I think? Boylston Street, yeah. Actually, a guy that I went to school with had started that up. Fryfunk, which the mesh guys know because they were one of the pioneers for mesh wireless. In fact, they still run, or for a while they ran by far the largest mesh network in the world. Greece may have beaten them out more recently, but
Spain's the big one.
Those guys actually keep to themselves. But for a while, Fryfunk Germany was that group was the biggest place. Interestingly, QWin, Champaign-Urbana, at University of Illinois, especially, QWin was a group out of related to University of Illinois, was really the pioneers in sort of Muni network type of Wi-Fi. So they actually built using this same hardware. You could run the QWin operating system and stick this device on your rooftop. Of course, they were dealing with farmlands and rural areas. Stick it on your rooftop, point an antenna at the QWin parent node, and expand the network in Champaign-Urbana, the mesh network that was running in Champaign-Urbana. And of course, I mentioned Île Sans Fil and Toronto, and the folks in Canada really sort of took up the effort in the mid-2000s and continued on. Since then, there have been a few other folks, but really, what started to happen in the 2004, 5, 6 time frame was that there were the early folks that were the uber geeks for this stuff, but of course, the real big push across the world started happening around 2004, 2005. So, moving into a different vein, who here knows that New York City actually issued not one, not two, but 3 RFPs over the course of the 2000s for parks Wi-Fi? I know you know about it. So 2003, because of the success that NYCwireless had with Bryant Park and some other parks, the Parks Department talked to us a bunch. Actually, it was in 2002. We talked with them a bunch, and they thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we got this everywhere? So they put out an RFP. They didn't listen to us at the time, unfortunately. And they basically said, well, look, we want to franchise out the ability to run Wi-Fi, but of course, you've got to pay us. 3 respondents. Verizon actually won the bid, if you can imagine at the time, except about a month later, they decided to pull out because they didn't realize in the RFP that they would owe the city money if they wanted to put up these Wi-Fi networks. So they went away, and a group called Wi-Fi Salon that was started by Marshall Brown, who has gone on to other projects, agreed to pay the city $30,000 a year for the franchise, and then the long.
Was he selling advertisements like Nokia and stuff?
Well, that was something. So yes, but that didn't happen until the second RFP came out, and everyone asked, well, what the heck happened to the first one? Because none of the networks actually were ever built because you couldn't raise the funding for it. So that eventually, the Parks Department actually found him a partner and got that moving. But that's how we got Wi-Fi for the first time in Central Park in about 2005, 2006. Parks Department finally learned their lesson in 2006, issued the second RFP, and the city no longer expected to be paid, but they still didn't fix a bunch of the other stuff that a lot of folks complained about, and that didn't actually generate too much. I think they sort of handed it over to Marshall and Wi-Fi Salon at the time to continue on. And finally in 2009, DoIT took it over, and they issued the third RFP for Parks Wi-Fi, and that sort of took a little bit better, but that's when the incumbents started to get really interested in, and there were a whole bunch of it's mostly AT&T, yeah, that actually got involved and tried to light up a bunch of parks, and I don't actually know if that ever really got off the ground.
We lit up 6 parks.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's still operational, but some are. Yeah.
Fort Greene is still alive. I know that. Barely.
We actually bid $1 for a park, which I don't think we never got a response. We were hoping at least to get a response from the city, but I don't think. Actually, if I remember correctly, they actually did respond and said okay, but the partners that we were working with thought we were kidding. So other interesting happenings around New York City over this period of time. So Verizon actually deployed phone booths with Wi-Fi back in 2003. And you can read about it in the New York Times article. The biggest problem, of course, was not that people didn't use it, but that was a problem, nor that the only way to access it is if you actually had a Verizon DSL account. In fact, they used it as a marketing campaign for Verizon DSL. But the biggest problem was that people realized that especially after this article came out, that there was $5,000 worth of equipment and it's sitting in the top of every phone booth that they lit up. And that equipment could be easily accessed with a screwdriver in the middle of the night. And so they subsequently had a lot of the network stolen by various folks over the course of a year or so.
Do it called the pimple on top of the phone.
That's right.
And they had to pay $20 a month before it. People went to and said, now you got to pay for it.
That's right.
And again, that all went off.
So 2004 Wireless Philadelphia launched. That was actually the beginning of NYCwireless, in fact. A woman by the name of Diana Neff was the CIO at the time, pretty visionary. They did the first public involvement and research in how to build Wi-Fi networks properly. In fact, they were the first of 3 major cities to do this, and they actually came up with a pretty good plan. But Earthlink swooped in at the last minute and said, we'll just take this off of your hands. And then Earthlink went belly up a few years later, and I think the network was sold for pennies on the dollar at some point. There were other problems with Earthlink.
The guy came to spoke and he said that the problem was the hills. They hadn't figured the hills that they couldn't get.
Well, the funny part is they just found some of the old equipment sitting in warehouses.
Did they really?
It was part of their last R5 they did last year. They're like, we found all this equipment, what do we do Gee, what are you doing?
Yeah. So I mentioned they were the first. The second was New York, which actually came out with a report in 2007, 2008 called the Diamond Consulting Report. If anyone ever asks in New York City about this work that was paid for by our tax dollars, they will start scratching their heads and wonder, what are you talking about? I actually have the report. If any of you want it,
And
I have a copy.
video of the presentation. If you go online, there is video about the video.
Yes, there is. But I actually have the report. I have the presentation and whatnot, which the city just sort of disavowed, unfortunately.
I'd say that what the Diamond Report concluded was that there was no reason to put Wi-Fi in the city because the people who really wanted it already had access, via other means, and the people, the undeserved, the unserved.
There was one caveat to that, which was public space. So, which is that New York City should have a lot more public space Wi-Fi. And I think the only thing that really came out of this report was the RFP number 3 as a result. But they don't actually, DoIT actually has no recollection that they actually even paid for this.
Well, they did another one afterwards too.
Yes, they did, although I don't know where that one actually went.
That wasn't Diamond, wasn't it?
That wasn't Diamond.
No,
Diamond
it wasn't Diamond, but it was another consulting group.
Yeah, yeah.
It was right before.
It's about
the
2011,
RFP.
right? Or 2010, I think.
No, 12.
12? Okay.
11 into 12.
Yeah. The third was Boston, which also had one of the most innovative and thoughtful reports that they pulled together, complete with a great business model, which they started to actually implement, but regime changes and whatnot in politics as they are, I think that never really got fully off the ground. And of course we got involved, we mentioned Andrew Richer with Mouse. He actually ran on a platform in 2005 on Wi-Fi for Public Advocate for Wi-Fi New York. He was, I think, it was the first competitive race for Public Advocate, but obviously he didn't win. And of course, 2005 started the network neutrality battles for Brand X. And so this was the other, you could sort of see all this stuff happen in the mid-2000s that actually was the genesis of the big push across the country and across the world for community wireless. We were also very early on in mesh networks. I wrote a blog post back in 2005 on why mesh networks are ideal for New York. Pretty interesting read just to see, not that it's good writing, but it was interesting to see what the ideas were that we were dealing with at the time. And starting in 2003, we had all of these various mesh networks or mesh network software that was getting going. So the whole idea of bringing mesh to New York has been something that many of us have been wishing for a very long time. Art. We actually ran the first public art, wireless art program. 2003 we had Wireless Park Lab Days. 2004 we had Spectropolis, and for a long weekend in 2004 we actually took over all of City Hall Park and got all of these artists to create things using wireless technology. This was the Balloon broadcasting messages from the internet. We had a whole bunch of community helpers, volunteers that would actually install wireless networks on buildings. This was a wireless network that we did in 2006 in I forget the park on 23rd and East River, but it was this was actually the first. I think it was the first battery-powered Wi-Fi hotspot in New York in the U.S. You can see some batteries.
Sorry to interrupt you, but Tony's getting itchy feet, so maybe we'll just put him on, and then if you have a few extra slides.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'll just walk this. It's like three more pictures. We actually had got some folks up on the top of Shake Shack, installing Wi-Fi there, Madison Square Park, and of course this is the other learning. This is after 3 years. What happens to an outdoor wireless access point? even with a NEMA enclosure. NEMA is a waterproof enclosure. You can see all the rust there and the water intrusion and whatnot. Thankfully, this was easily replaced, but that was NYC Wireless over the last 16 years.
When did you deploy the solar powered? Solar powered setup.
Yeah, that was 2006, I think. It was approximately. Yeah.
Okay, I know we could go for hours on this,
Yeah.
but time is growing short, and here's Tony. And so I did notice that the Red Hook Initiative just put out a report in the last day or two that's good reading, which probably he's going to refer you to. I think that Sandy was your finest hour. Is that right?
It brought a lot of attention, that's for sure. Yeah.
And you're associated with New America?
We are not part of their groups, but we are associated, yes.
Anyway, take it away.
Sorry, Dana, that was very interesting. Sorry to rush you. And I want to add my part, part of ego, but also because it all makes sense how all of these guys led to me, who doesn't really know much about technology, right? But when you think about it, it's like now today, people like me can be in technology because it's everywhere and it's easier, and we can apply other skills we may or may not have, right? So let me tell you what we've been doing in Red Hook over the last few years. Everyone who's been to Red Hook or knows Red Hook, we're all New Yorkers. I mean, the one key that allows us to do what we need to do is that we are sort of like a peninsula or something like that. We're cut off by the highway, we're surrounded by water, so there's a very strong community sense there. As you know, we have public housing, we have cafes and boutiques and all this sort of thing. So, it's a neighborhood, like many neighborhoods in New York, that's sort of in flux, gentrifying, switching around. And at where I work at the Red Hook Initiative, which is a youth development organization, we're trying to help young people pursue their dreams and be co-creators of their lives and community. And that especially means for residents of public housing. And we want them to be able to take advantage of the things that are coming to their neighborhood. And I actually entered to RHI. My previous career was media production with young people. I used to have a studio in Red Hook. I also live in Red Hook. So I got to RHI by doing internet radio. And what happened is programs with teens. And the problem was that we were doing stories about our lives, and they were doing stories about their lives and the community, but it wasn't getting to the community members, right? So I had this idea that we could, if we created a network, a Wi-Fi network, people would sign on and get those pieces of those products immediately, right? And then it sort of spiraled from there, where it was like, oh, we can also offer the resources we have within our physical walls to the whole neighborhood. It could be a trusted resource of this information. At first, we built a network, and that's what this was just eventually you got an internet, but first we just had a network, like an intranet, but a bunch of people signed on, were saying like, why? Why would I use network to not get on the internet? So luckily, we shared our Verizon quietly, and then everything we've done is sort of thankful to Brooklyn Fiber, which is a local ISP, because we couldn't get anyone on Verizon or Time Warner on the phone to talk about what we wanted to do. So we had set up a couple hotspots in the neighborhood. We're building some tools for it. And then Hurricane Sandy happened, as you all know, and this is a map of the flooding. It just so happened the buildings we were on did not lose power when 90% of the community did. It was Providence or something like that. So we were able to, we injected more bandwidth into the network. Brooklyn Fiber came on board right at that moment to do that, and we made a couple connections from our organization here over to apartment here, and then we're able to share our internet, our broadband, in the park where the mayor's office is set up, the National Guard was there, all sorts of things were happening in that park, and a lot of things were happening in our organization. We sort of became like ground zero for the recovery effort in Red Hook. Let's see. So, and as Jolie mentioned, this is when resiliency happened to New York, and people talked about resiliency, and we became like the poster child of resiliency for community infrastructure, community for communication, I guess you'd say. So that brought a lot of attention and allowed us to continue what we were doing. This is still how it basically works for the most part, though this is a very old visual. But as we continue to build, we're finding gateways throughout the neighborhood and sharing the bandwidth through there, and then bringing it down to rooftops or windows of small businesses and residents. This is where we're at right now, and we've actually been at this spot for 3 years. This is about 15 hotspots in a square mile. The size of these hotspots are sort of negligible. It's sort of frustrating because we actually I'm going very fast, and I apologize because I'm going to have to leave after this, but we won a grant from the Economic Development Corporation in 2014, and we're just now finally starting to do the design and do the installation. So we held up here because we thought, okay, we're going to do this, but now we finally are. So quickly, you'll see what's going to happen. So this is the current growth right now. This is the RISE gateways that we're going. The grant we want is called RISE. These are the new gateways we're going to put in, and this will actually change depending on. Sorry, it's probably hard to see in the back. Who are the businesses that come online with us? And then we'll put in repeaters, and then alternate repeaters, and so eventually on the commercial streets of Red Hook, you should have ubiquitous Wi-Fi coverage. But if you look at this map, it's very clear there's a big part that's missing, and it's the NYCwireless property that is right here. So, subsequently, or I should say at the same time, we were talking to NYCwireless. And the first time we tried to do it, we met with a lower level employee, and it didn't seem to go up the chain. So what we did is we decided to focus on proving our case and surrounding the area with our hotspots to show that we could do it. And then when we went back a couple years later, we had a better connection, so we were able to talk to he was like head of IT operations or something like that. I can't remember, his name is Bob Morano. And he had an ear to the idea, and we actually eventually we were given permission to go onto the property.
What is the NYCwireless?
NYCwireless is the housing authority. It's like a public housing.
New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA.
Sorry about that. So we won that permission, but then literally 3 months later, the mayor announced that he was going to wire 5 NYCwireless properties, Red Hook being one of them. It's not a total loss because we didn't have the funding at that time to do what we had gotten permission to do. The sort of, as we grow, this is sort of a story, is we're losing some of the grassroots nature, and hopefully not the control, but our vision, our mission shifts as we bring on new partners. So it was through our advocacy and our example that now 5 NYCwireless developments are going to be wired. And luckily in Red Hook, it's going to be Red Hook Wi-Fi. Our young people who work with us mapped where they live and said where people hang out and where people don't hang out. So this is really, this idea of like a local knowledge base is incredibly important for projects like these, in my opinion. And similarly, the Red Hook Initiative has been around for 15 years. So this is actually just a few of the partnerships that we've built over the years that allowed us to either put up equipment or market their opportunities, their workshops, their jobs, things like that. But how do we do this is because of the Red Hook Digital Stewards. So this is what I like to, I think why I wanted to stay, besides my ego, was to say that now we're opening up all this work to everyone, right? It doesn't have to start on the couch, right? Like with the geeks or whatever, it can be everywhere, right? There's training involved, obviously. You need to bring young people, in this case, young adults, in to train them, build their confidence levels, think about, sort of show them pathways that they didn't realize existed for them, right? And so to do that, we do all sorts of, we use the Red Hook Wi-Fi as a platform for learning and their products. So some of the things they do is they promote the network. They go out and do surveys, and I can share this report we did last summer. They use community outreach. The one thing that's really been great about the digital stories and their work here is, I would say for the first couple of years, or perhaps even now, if you ask someone on the street in Red Hook what they think about Red Hook Wi-Fi, they'll say, it's a great idea, I love it, but it never fucking works. So, but I think if we were somebody else, and they didn't see their neighbors and family members building it, then a long time ago we would have been dead, But they understand that it's a community project, and everyone loves seeing the young people in the community contributing. So they're doing installation of our hotspots, of our equipment, I should say. They're managing our splash page, and meanwhile learning how to do all this as they learn, They learn video production, and they end up making videos for local businesses that are featured on the network. And then we get calls all the time to do AV installations, redo people's office IT things and things, IT setups and such. So, it's a career training program, and a lot of what we end up having is a small sampling find their way into tech, a large sampling find their way into jobs, and I would say everyone grows their sort of confidence and leadership and efficacy in terms of them entering into this work world, What Red Hook Wi-Fi is sort of thinking about now is we've pretty much, with what I've explained, we've reached this idea of access, right? Everyone now will hopefully have access. So what does it mean if a community is building this access? And I think it can mean a lot of things. In some form or fashion, you're going to mediate that experience, right? So when we first started, this was the splash page, and it had businesses. We built a couple of tools, like we had a bus time app before the bus time app came to our bus line. We built a stop and frisk reporting app, and it was very quick. It was like, here's the list of stores, here's some things happening in the neighborhood. Nowadays, we're much more about content, because we built out that digital steward program, and so again, we're making videos. We have map, we have information on the businesses and the community organizations. This Red Hook Hub I'll talk about for a second, because as we build it, we realize that who are we missing, right? Maybe we're missing the seniors, or people who aren't tech savvy or have tech devices. So we built this thing with a group from AIGA, which is the Association of Graphic Designers, and it's called the Hub. And what the Hub is, so the Hub is, it's online and analog. But the online website is mirrored on actual bulletin boards. So there are multiple ways, you guys won't be able to see this, but there's multiple ways of somebody inputting the information and multiple ways of people getting the information back out, and it can all be administered by one hub coordinator. So that's...
Is that a digital steward?
Yes, it's a digital steward graduate, yeah. So, sorry for the speed, but again, I'm glad you forced me to stay, because, this chronology of the work that we've done, it's very important to New York City. Thank you, all of you, your work. And, now, and I think we find ourselves in a place where there's so much opportunity that's not just, tech. These are the questions we have for us. What's the best financial model to sustain ourselves? What model maximizes the positive impact for the low-income residents of Red Hook? And then, how would it be replicated elsewhere? So, I am going to have to beat it out of here right away, but you can find Tony at rhicenter.org, or anybody here can connect you with me. I'm happy to bring you in, give you a tour, talk about whatever you like. Thanks.
We, the Internet Society, do fund projects like yours, and we're funding, NYC Mesh to the tune of, a fair amount, and what they're looking for is models that can be taken and exported to other places in terms of community networking. I think that I'm afraid the deadline for this year for a large grant is tomorrow.
Well.
It's not too late if you wanted to go and look it up tonight, Beyond the Net.
Okay.
You could stick one in tomorrow, and I'd certainly support it. And then we do small grants as well that are like $3.5 grand that you can apply for any time. So get closer to the Internet Society. Don't be a stranger. Is what I'll say to you. Okay, so we could go for questions, but Bruce inspired me to sort of talk a little bit about my own experiences here. And as some of you know, my background is in punk rock, and in the 70s, what I did was I made all the badges for punk rock, and printed fanzines at the beginning to peer-to-peer. And so this was a technological revolution in the 70s that printing got cheap, people could duplicate cassettes, and it was the first time that people could sort of, pass culture around amongst themselves rather than it sort of come down from above. And at the same time as personal computers came out, I had a VIC-20 and a 300 baud modem, and I used to print, I ran printing presses and I had piles of, publications, and I said, we wouldn't have to print all this stuff if we could just talk to each other. And eventually I got out to escape a large tax bill and went to California where all the networking was going on. And I got there, and what I discovered was that nobody was into punk rock. The only people who were into this stuff were hippies. There was a thing called The Well in San Francisco, and they sort of like a bunch of deadheads, and also they had this very proprietary attitude. You own your own words was their thing, whereas my slogan when I made badges was images virus. It was like, just let it, blow up. It was a whole thing. Meanwhile, my conclusion was, and then I got involved in promoting punk rock shows in LA, and it was like CBGBs multiplied by a factor of about 300. We had, a mosh pit of thousands of people. But what I realized was that television was what made a difference in America. And so, the center of television was New York, and I came to New York. And then eventually I managed to set up a TV show called Snub TV that went out on USA Network. And this I worked with my friend in England. There was a band called Crass, who were the big anarchist band in London. And they had this Scientologist who ran their record label. And he was technologically savvy, and he set up a TV studio, but what he also set up was a computer, and there was a thing called Western Union EasyLink and MCI mail, and this is 1986, where you could actually send emails, packet switching, but email cost money in those days. It cost it was 50 cents for 1K, or if you went over 1K, it was like $1. And, we made this, we could exchange information. We made this TV show, which was produced in London and went out on here. And I promoted it using the network. And what I found was that I could send, I'd do all my write emails, which were hooked into the telex system through Western Union, so you could have it chuntering out of everybody's telex machines. And at the same time, I started doing an email newsletter about the New York music scene in about '87 that was called What's Up. And I remember once after I wrote about Karen Finley at the Cat Club shoving vegetables up her butt, and Einstein and Neubauten at the Palladium, where there was a riot and they ripped down the fire curtain and so on. I got a message back from Wozniak, who was on my distribution list, saying this is the best thing that ever came out of my computer, like this tale of, like this, and so that was kind of what I got into, and I got out of it after a bit because I realized that phones, when I started doing voicemail came in, that voicemail was a lot easier to do than this, and I started a thing called a phone zine, where you just dialed in and you went from number to number. And I didn't really get back into it until '94, which was when the 486 machine came out. And like Bruce, I started getting into websites. And I was a little later. I think my first websites were '95. But if you're on the NCSA list, that was there it is that shows that you were doing the first websites. And I'm on there I did a website for the Bad Brains, my friends, back in '95. It's on the NCSA list. So.
Yeah, we were sitting there.
So that's a bit of my background. But having said that, Brian you've listened to all this. You're the guy from NYC Mesh. Do you want to come up here and talk for a minute? Do you want to just sit there and ask questions of?
Yeah, I think if we open up for questions now.
So yeah, so if I'd be interested to hear what your comments are.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear kind of situate what we're doing in the history of what's happened in New York. And I first went online on Mindbox in '93.
All right, yeah,
So I have
the Vox.
But I wasn't aware of all of what everyone here was doing. But yeah, and I got after that I started programming CD-ROMs and Voyager and LTI. And, yeah, so one thing he said is don't advertise as a non-profit.
Right, all right. It comes down to people's perception of you.
Yeah, we're kind of radically decentralized and people own their own nodes and the whole way we can finance things is still being figured out. Like
Well, again, my comment is, just because you're an LLC, just because you're a for-profit, does not mean that you cannot do good works. What it means is it tells a lot of people who really, really wish to consume your time and to consume your life and consume your resources for no return to the community, no return to the environment, no return to you. People are like that. If you give them that, next thing you know, they're going to be asking for the arm. Right? This gives you the ability to sit there and say, no. Just no. By the way, I'd like to mention Matthew Hirsch, who is actually one of the Bad Wolf partners and one of the founders or early adopters of the Dorsai Embassy, just managed to slither in. Hello, Matthew.
So yeah, anyway, that's something we're battling with.
So you're a non-profit?
We're fiscally sponsored by ISOC.
Oh, okay.
So we're a non-profit through them. And this year we've got to figure out, whether we become no.
Well, yeah, don't incorporate until you make those strategic decisions.
Yeah.
I'm not saying being a .org is wrong. I'm telling you, for my organization, yeah, no. Being a .org was absolutely the wrong step.
Yeah, it's very hard to organize volunteers. It would be a lot easier if we had money and could pay them.
Well, okay. It all depends on how you present it. One of the great things that's always been good around the lair is if I sit there and say, by the way, I'm in town this weekend and I'm going to do this, and this, I will have 4 to 5 people around me going like, okay, so what are we doing? What's the plan? What's the layout? What do you need me to do? What's the next step? 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 Because they see it as a training opportunity. They get some value out of this. They gain knowledge, they gain capability, which translates to better career opportunities for them.
That's the digital steward idea.
Yeah.
We've been doing this, since the beginning of time, I think. The other side is you're a nonprofit. What do you get out of being a nonprofit? Well, in theory, you can take donations and people can give you a tax write-off. So let me tell you about the donations. donations are, we got a bunch of crap that's been sitting in our storage room for the last 5 years, and if you take it away, if you come get it and you take it away, you know, and while you're there, it's like, oh, hey, yeah, we got this dead printer. Will you take that? Oh, and there's the garbage out of the kitchen. Can you take that out?
I'll interrupt you here to say that Brian, I know, has received some quite decent kit from certain people that he uses.
Cool.
And that also that his model is that you know, the people who use the service are encouraged to like subscribe via PayPal, so that they pay $20 a month, which is also tax deductible as a donation. So
Okay. Well, hey.
So there's a good example.
If it's working for you.
Whether that's legitimate use of donations is something I think he probably needs further advice on.
You would definitely want to speak to a tax attorney.
What do you actually need people to do?
Well, we're having a meet up on Thursday to get a team together to install, because that's what's been holding us up the most, is just getting people on rooftops. I would get a few people, and then they would get busy with their work or whatever.
How do you deal with getting the rooftop rights and gaining access?
It's up to the apartments. Like, people ask their super whether they can put something on the roof. Or a lot of rooftops.
Informally.
Yeah, every time I go on rooftops,
really
please show
angry
up.
about it. But it's the way you got to do it. So
It's the same as the DirecTV model. If you want the DirecTV, the guy shows up, maybe you want an antenna on the roof. Okay, mind if I drop a wire down? Not my building, I don't care, drop it.
well, yeah. How complex is the install?
Yeah, it's like DirecTV.
Zip tie something to a pole and drop a line, and then you run
just
wires
Ethernet.
to people.
Yeah, Ethernet.
Into the.
We can have mass.
And you mostly end up doing it through like where the air conditioner is. You can just go on the side and see that.
And you run power over Ethernet right up to the.
Yeah.
And so is the issue that you're losing, is that you don't have enough people to actually come and do that?
Yeah. It's incredibly hard to coordinate. I've got to look at all the dots on the map and figure out, oh, this one can do.
How many buildings do you have to light, or how many customers are you trying to?
Well, there's 500 people on the join form, but we've only got like 45. So I mean, there's maybe 60 of those that are good candidates for installs.
What's the goal of the project exactly?
Sorry?
What's the goal?
To cover the whole city and the community and network.
Cover the whole city?
Is your model like escape or phone? I mean, have you modeled yourself those other larger?
Oh yeah, briefly and spend.
And people who are hosting the access points provide the bandwidth?
Well, we have one, what we call SuperNode now, that has donated gigabits. So if you're within 2 miles of that, you can get.
Oh, I see. So radio you can consume as well as.
Yeah.
I think Brian's a little naive on this, because he doesn't think they're ever going to like run out of bandwidth. You know, because we go straight from the node into DECIX, and that from that we're tapped into the internet, and therefore there's no transit involved. Isn't that your theory, Brian?
I think it's pretty normal. Like when an ISP sells bandwidth, they have a gig, so then they give 10 gig connections, because people don't use it all at the same time.
Because it's called oversell.
Yeah. So
Right, and that's been done for years. And what's your calculated oversell? 5x, 10x, 15x.
Yeah, I think 10 stands. But yeah, we've got plenty of bandwidth.
So the other plan he has is to tap the NYC link system, and one of the things that he's pointed out is that with those link things, that the signal actually goes up out of the
Yeah.
you know, rather than sideways, and so it's quite easy to like get to from a rooftop. But I understood that they registered your MAC address, and if once you took a certain amount of data, but he says that's not true.
No, there is no data limit, but after a certain amount of time, you have to re-register.
Yeah, that's a month. I've got to write a script to automate the login.
And then, and then people sharing their Spectrum or Verizon things, the theory is that although it's technically against the terms of service, there's never going to be a court case on this because no one wants there to be a precedent either way.
Yeah, the court case is not your problem in that regard. We've been through that back in 2003. There's actually on our blog from back in the day are, I think, some of the cease and desist letters that Verizon would send out to some of the folks that hosted hotspots. It's sort of a cat and mouse game, but if you can avoid actually sort of poking the bear, you're better off.
If you don't say anything, they won't say anything.
No, they will definitely say something at some point, and it'll be at an inopportune time for you because you'll be depending upon those nodes, and then they'll start cutting people off, and then people are going to get pissed off at you because though you told them not to do it, they did it anyway, and it was working, so therefore it's your fault.
I haven't heard of them cutting off anyone for sharing.
No,
They haven't recently, but they have in the past.
Moving from Verizon or from a Link now? Because Link can very easily.
No, not Link. Yeah, Verizon.
But Link can very easily block your MAC address, and that's it.
And you're better off if you need to share it with Link, but you you just want to be careful, and you basically once you start doing it, you can start the clock ticking for about a couple of years before they start to notice.
Oh no, I've spoken
to the Link people. Yeah, they arguably might be okay with it, but the Verizon people won't be. And they'll start sending cease and desists, and it's not like in the end you're not going to have like serious problems, but you're better off. If you've got the other resources, just using them.
Taking my little East Village mesh as an example, I was just sharing with my neighbours and across the street into a bar down the road, and so there was like about 10 nodes all running off my Time Warner connection. But now I've got a Nanobe aimed at our supernode, so I've replaced my Time Warner with the supernode connection, and it's
better.
It's way better.
What are some of the sort of stats like in terms of network usage so far? What's the average cell doing? I mean, I'll give Printingers. I know the guys at NYCwireless. They say 42nd Street is now the equivalent of Super Bowl. I mean, they're putting so much bandwidth out there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I haven't been doing any.
It would be good to know what like the average consumption is.
When you ask what he needs, there is something that he needs is backup network management, that nature.
Yeah, something like an SNMP, something to grab all the data.
Do you have something? Do you have the ability on the systems that you're setting up that provide that information?
Yeah, you just run the scripts.
What's your
Sorry?
What is your hardware?
Ubiquity and TP-Link, and just put a lighter weight.
They're pretty custom firmware on the Ubiquity gear.
Yeah. OpenWRT. It's a QMP mesh package.
Then yeah, he's got the SNMP to be able to pull data.
Yeah, you can have an SNMP server set up that will offload the data, and then you'll be able to have a compiled dashboard. It'll tell you what's up and what's down as well on a node-by-node basis. They charge you by device. I think it's right, isn't it? Mostly SNMP, it's by device mostly. I don't know of any real shareware these days.
We could Nagios.
Let the man speak.
I had a general question of all who are building public or outdoor access points. What's the noise level from the cable guys? You know, personally, we moved from Upper West Side to Harlem, now we're out in West New York, New Jersey, but so I always turn my Wi-Fi off in the city, you know, Time Warner or whatever, because they appeared, but I couldn't get good throughput and they were screwing around, so I just go ultimate 4G. I'll watch a video here and there, but I'm looking at text content, multimedia. But I'm just wondering, what's like the noise level? I always assume the cable guys are really broadcasting from inside of buildings. That's why the coverage is so bad inside. They don't have a whole lot of external access points, right? So then, what's like the noise level and the interference for your other public access points with the cable guys?
Well, first to clarify, so
Okay.
anywhere out in the boroughs, wherever there's a strand, you'll usually see a white box hanging on the strand. Because that's their strand, so they have free rent. So they just go and hang an AP,
Right,
and they're using their own 90 volts from their cable system.
right,
Problem when it came to New York, they're on a 6th, 7th floor rooftop pointing
Right.
down, because they went the cheap way,
right.
and they didn't want to do the install in the building. Most of that was built by Tower Street in Manhattan.
Yeah.
So,
We should never work that well.
right. So the problem is they're not pointed, they weren't maintained, wireless backhaul going back into the Time Warner network versus it being directly to the network. So when you're in New York City, Manhattan, it's like being on two different Wi-Fi networks. But as far as noise levels, I mean, 2.4 in the city is useless.
Right.
5 gig, yeah, if you walk into Times Square, that's useless just about. But you know, you can probably get a better signal off of your LTE.
Yeah.
Because T-Mobile's got a cell site sitting there above their store behind the billboard. They'll give you 35 megs download. But you're looking at noise levels that are probably meg 75, meg 80 range just to begin.
I mean, is it an issue in terms of the public access points?
Yes, it depends on where you're talking about.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've got a hard stop at 9 o'clock, and it's 8:57.
Can I just make one more comment on the 5 gig?
Yeah.
So the only other problem with 5 gig is LTE, which is coming out now this year, which is putting LTE on the unlicensed network right on top
We
of
already do
5G.
that in New York City.
LTEU, we could run a whole meeting on that, which so.
Yes.
But what I'll say is that, you know, it seems like a good group that we have here, and if I should run more, we could get together and talk again, you know, and now that we've sort of met and everything, and, you know, and there is obviously, what I'd like to say is for you to go away and think about what it is that we'd like to talk about from what we're just coming up with now, which is, you know, yes, the noise in the city, basically what you can, you know, to me, you know, it's the state of the wire in the city of what there is that you can plug into. You know, I once said to Bruce Regal, what about that thing that Verizon put in, that ring round that they said they were going to use that they're not using? And he said, well, you can't have that. And about a year ago or two, de Blasio stood up and said, yes, you know, other people can use that fibre, you know, well, you know, unless it's a state of emergency, in which case we'll cut them off. It's there, there's a ring that can be used, there's various other things. So there are sort of topics, you know, we obviously could talk a lot about these topics. So, you know, there is the meetup page that we had this event on, but I'd like to, you know, to think about maybe coming back together in about a month and, you know, and maybe thinking of, you know, the sort of network, community network brainstorm group, as it were, you know, to like, as a backup, you know, the sort of, you know, backhaul, although Brian thinks he doesn't going to have a problem with that, I can see that if he is successful and gets install teams, suddenly there's going to be a problem with that.
I'll just volunteer. My interest here is I'm working on 60 gigahertz front haul, working with Taiwan and Singapore also. Qualcomm has it today. I was working with Silicon Imaging, the Lattice Semiconductor guys, but they weren't going to commercialize it. So I think within the next 12 to 18 months, we're looking at like a gigabit second over 1,000 feet, or maybe
Yeah.
$200 radio
So,
there.
so that is essentially 5G, right? That's what
Well,
some
but
people.
I don't call it that because
Cool.
I think that's a bastardized notion. I'm just saying, focus on the front wall, so edge densification.
Yeah. So I'm very open.
And then the second thing I'm focused on is
suggestions.
settlement system, because I think what's the big missing piece here in a lot of mesh and sort of, self-organizing networks is interactor settlements. The IP stack doesn't have settlements. We sort of got away from the settlement model, and that's really how universal service is achieved. It's antithetical. A lot of people in the room will say, settlements, we don't like that. That's, government regulation. But I think we can create market-driven ones with the blockchain and stuff like that. So if this is a forum to introduce all those, that type of discussion, I'd love to.
Always
Okay, very good. 9 o'clock on the dot.